A perfect murder plan always falls apart on something small. Sometimes it's a witness who was standing in the wrong place. Sometimes it's a cell tower record that runs 15 minutes too long. And sometimes it's an empty whiskey bottle with no fingerprints on it at all. In Phoenix, a man was found dead in his car. Was it an accident? At first glance, yes. But the prosecution counted exactly 7 flaws inside that perfect accident. And those 7 flaws changed 2 people's lives forever. At 8:05 in the morning, on a bend in Maricopa County Road 7, a hiker spotted an SUV on its side in the brush about 200 meters below. He didn't go down. He pulled out his phone and called 911. Police and an ambulance arrived within minutes. There was a man inside the vehicle, slumped against the steering wheel, not moving. His heart had stopped. His name was Derek Holt. He was 38 years old. The first responders filed a traffic accident report. A winding road, a gap of about 5 meters in the barrier at the end of the bend, and a vehicle that had gone straight over the edge right through that gap. No brake marks, but that wasn't unheard of with a driver who had panicked or lost consciousness. The initial report read, "Probable traffic accident fatality." The file was forwarded to the prosecutor's office through standard procedure. A DA Simone Reyes looked at the file that afternoon. She opened the autopsy report, and she underlined one sentence: bilateral contusion on the neck consistent with ligature injury. She picked up her phone. She called Detective Ray Okafor. "This isn't an accident file," she said. "Come take a look." In Phoenix, that day a traffic accident file became a murder case. But the real question wasn't how it was done. It was where the plan had fallen apart. And the answer to that question was hiding in 7 different places. Some people give themselves away while being tried. They laugh at the wrong moment, or their faces go flat when they shouldn't. Vanessa Holt came to the courtroom every day in the same navy blazer or something very close to it. She sat. She took notes. She never leaned toward her attorney to whisper. She never appeared to look at the jury. She just looked ahead and took notes. A psychologist told a local reporter about the course of the trial. Control is the most classic of defense mechanisms, but excessive control is like a sealed door. It hides what's inside, but the seal itself draws attention. That observation wasn't evidence, but the article the reporter wrote appeared in that morning's paper, sold near the jury room. Marcus Teal's demeanor was different. He came each morning, but seemed slightly smaller each time. He couldn't break the habit of keeping his hands flat on the table, as if he was holding down the surface or something inside himself. In the end, the day the verdict was read, his hands came up from the table for the first time and fell to his lap. In that moment, something small in Marcus let go. One juror said, in a post-trial interview, "Vanessa's note-taking surprised me. Because a person doesn't take notes for their own case. They don't take notes for their attorney. They take notes only to appear occupied. That difference mattered to me." Another juror said, "Marcus's hands got to me. He was trying to hold something down, but he couldn't hold it." The law does not formally accept courtroom demeanor as direct evidence, but juries are made up of people, and people notice how a person sits in that room, how they look, when they speak, and when they choose not to. Those impressions don't appear on the evidence list, but they are there, soaked into the walls of the deliberation room. The prosecution didn't try to prove when Vanessa and Marcus's relationship had begun, only how it was being conducted, because the existence of the relationship itself had already been admitted. But the question of whether that relationship had been carefully hidden from Derek was at the center of the case. If Vanessa truly had an open arrangement, why were so many things concealed? Vanessa's former co-worker Priya Nayar was hesitant when she took the stand. It was clear she hadn't wanted to come, but she had been called. "Vanessa never mentioned Marcus openly," she said. "Once, she'd implied they were seeing each other, but she pulled back immediately. She asked me not to say anything. She said her husband wouldn't understand." ADA Reyes said nothing. She just took a note. Detective Okafor submitted a hotel reservation record. 2 months before the incident, a room at a Phoenix hotel had been reserved in Marcus Teal's name, with payment made from Vanessa Holt's credit card. "That's a lawful transaction," Carlton Webb said immediately. "Yes," said Okafor, "but if Derek knows about it and there's an arrangement, why use the wife's card under the husband's name?" Throughout this case, the prosecution had no burden to prove a romantic relationship. It was only trying to show that the relationship was not open. And a plan built on top of something that isn't open carries concealment as a foundational habit. A habit of concealment, in turn, is evidence of a deliberate mindset. Secret reservations, trips made without a phone, a message written in someone else's linguistic habits, signal traces deliberately suppressed. Each of these could be explained away individually, but looked at together, all of them pointed in a single direction. This relationship was hidden. And that hiddenness was not the plan itself. It was the mindset that made the plan possible. The prosecution addressed motive directly. Derek Holt had taken out a $1.2 million life insurance policy 14 months before his death. The named beneficiary was his wife, Vanessa Holt. That alone wasn't a crime. Taking out life insurance is an ordinary decision. But the timing of that decision coincided exactly with the most intensive period of Vanessa's relationship with Marcus Teal. Detective Okafor reported, in Vanessa's browser search history, 1 month before the policy was taken out, searches for life insurance early payout conditions, accidental death life insurance, and accidental death documentation process had been found. "Do these searches alone prove a crime?" said Ada Reyes. "No. But they offer us a map of the mind that explains why this policy was taken out." Marcus Teal's financial picture was also put on the table. $87,000 in debt, student loans, a car loan, and a credit card deficit. "I'm not saying that's a crime," said Reyes, "but in this picture, someone was in a romantic relationship with the beneficiary of a $1.2 million policy, and that policy would have paid out immediately on an accident certificate." That sentence produced 2 different reactions in the room. On the left, the victim's family lowered their heads. On the right, Vanessa didn't blink. Carlton Webb objected. "Your Honor, millions of people in this country hold life insurance policies and are unaware of policies their spouses have opened. The prosecution is attempting to convert a lawful financial transaction into a murder motive." Reyes stayed quiet. She had already said what she wanted to say. The jury filled in the space on their own. $1.2 million wasn't the answer to this case. It was the thing that asked the question. Why now? Why this policy? Why make it look like an accident? Money didn't explain the killing itself. It explained the calculation behind it. And a calculation points to the existence of a plan. If there's a plan, there's no coincidence. If there's no coincidence, 7 flaws stop being 7 flaws. They become 7 pieces of evidence. Kyle Morrow was 36. He and Derek Holt had a 14-year friendship, going back to high school. Ada Reyes had called him both to verify the Kyle Morrow reference in the draft message and to paint a portrait of Derek's life. When he took the stand, his eyes were red but his voice was steady. "Derek didn't hide his problems," Kyle said. "He told me everything. If something was wrong with his wife, he'd say so. If money was tight, he'd say so. But in the last 6 months, his face had gotten tense. We'd ask, 'Are you okay?' He'd just say he was fine. We didn't push." Reyes asked, "Did he tell you anything about his marriage during that time?" Kyle thought about it. "Just one thing," he said. "Some things need to change." He didn't say anything beyond that. Ada Reyes projected the draft message. "Mr. Morrow, have you seen this message before?" Kyle looked at the screen. "No, I never received it." "And did Derek tell you where he was that evening?" "No, we weren't in contact that night." Reyes paused for a moment. "So this message was written for you, but never reached you. And you also don't know where Derek actually was that night." "That's right," Kyle said. His voice broke that time. The draft message had been written to create an alibi, to give the impression Derek was with his friend, but it had never been sent. This carried 2 possibilities. Either Derek had written it himself and died before sending it, a weak possibility, since Derek never said bro, or the message had been written by someone else but there hadn't been time to send it. Either way, that draft was the remnant of a plan. In this part of the plan, all it would have taken was pressing send, just one button. But that button was never pressed, and that unpressed button was the smallest but perhaps the sharpest piece of the entire case, because what a plan leaves unfinished tells you far more than what it completes. At the Maricopa County Superior Court that Tuesday morning, the defendant's table was split in two. On the left, Vanessa Holt in a navy blazer, Derek's wife, an accountant for the past 2 years. On the right, Marcus Teal in a sport coat that didn't quite fit, a warehouse supervisor, the other side of a secret relationship that had been going on for years. Judge Patricia Odom ascended the bench, her silver locks pulled back with a wide clip, beaded reading glasses swinging from a chain around her neck. She opened the file, glanced at the clerk. The State of Arizona versus Vanessa Holt and Marcus Teal, case number 23 CR 09214. Her voice carried the particular ease of someone who has heard everything in this room at least twice. ADA Simone Reyes rose. "This case is about an accident that wasn't one," she said. She didn't raise her voice. "A man was found dead in his car. His neck had been compressed with a rope or cable. After his death, his body was placed in the driver's seat. The vehicle was pushed over the embankment. This, Your Honor, is not an accident. This is first-degree murder." Carlton Webb rose for Vanessa. "Not guilty." Just 2 words. He sat. Dana Park rose for Marcus. "Not guilty. My client never touched that car." The room weighed the silence between those 2 denials, and most people noticed that neither defense attorney had said a single word to the other. Dr. Nadia Yuen took the stand with the steady composure of a forensic expert. Silver-streaked hair pulled back. Her report placed in front of her but not opened. She had it memorized. "Derek Holt died of asphyxia," she said. "Specifically, ligature compression applied to the neck region. The contusions were inflicted ante-mortem. Death resulted from the ligature. Trauma consistent with the traffic accident was post-mortem." ADA Reyes asked, "Dr. Yuen, is it possible a driver who had an accident might have braked before his death?" Yuen removed her glasses. "You're asking for a general opinion, not one specific to this scene." "Correct. In a spontaneous accident scenario, any conscious driver's final reflex is to brake. Sometimes it leaves no marks, but load is registered on the braking system. Here, there was no load trace on the braking system at all." ADA Reyes projected a scene map onto the large screen. One area was circled in red, the exact barrier gap through which the car had fallen. "Dr. Yuen, that gap is 5 meters wide. The total barrier length on this bend is 340 meters. What is your view on the probability of a driver losing control at exactly that 5-meter point?" Yuen, "Statistically possible. Practically, it would be an extremely precise coincidence." An extremely precise coincidence. That sentence hung in the air of the room. One juror tapped a pen against the page, not to take a note, but simply to mark a spot. Flaw count, 1. In the second round of cross-examination, Carlton Webb tried to shift the ground to ambiguities in the autopsy report. "Dr. Yuen, are you attributing the ligature mark definitively to a rope or cable?" "No," Yuen said. "The shape of the contusion is consistent with an object that applied sustained pressure, but we were unable to identify the specific object. So this injury could also have been left by a belt, a strap, even a vehicle seat belt. Theoretically possible." Webb turned to the jury. "Theoretically," he said, as though that single word resolved everything. The second flaw came from a small object. In the footwell on the front passenger side of the car, the forensic team had found a whiskey bottle with a green label. It was empty, and that emptiness ordinarily wouldn't be a problem. People carry empty bottles in their cars. But on that bottle, there was not a single fingerprint, not one. ADA Reyes held up the bottle in its evidence bag and asked, "Detective Okafor, what does the lab report say?" Okafor answered without opening the file. "No fingerprints or DNA residue of any kind were detected on any surface of the bottle, including the opening. The bottle had been emptied and wiped clean. And if a person had used this bottle to drink from it, They would necessarily have left saliva or DNA at the opening, and fingerprints on the body of the bottle. Ada Reyes projected a text message from the phone records onto the screen. It was a message Vanessa had sent Derek a few hours before the incident. Inside it, the exact whiskey brand name was written. "There's that green whiskey in the cabinet. Have a glass, relax." The room's silence acquired a different weight with that message. Reyes didn't raise her voice. She simply moved to the next question. Flaw count 2. The planners had thought one thing through correctly. If there was a little alcohol in his blood, it would reinforce the accident impression. But they'd missed one thing. A bottle with no trace on it at all gave no explanation for what that bottle was doing at an accident scene. A bottle with no fingerprints was more suspicious evidence than a bottle that had been drunk from. Detective Ray Okafor took the stand at an unhurried pace. His dark blazer was neat, the file he carried thin. Ada Reyes's question was brief. What do the defendant's phone signals say about that night? Okafor projected a cell tower map onto the screen. Vanessa Holt's known line ceased transmitting signal at 2 p.m. No signal until 7:12 the following morning, meaning during the entire critical window, including the time of the accident, her registered phone was completely silent. Marcus Teal's phone entered a signal gap at 9:42 p.m. Okafor said, "No record until the following morning." In his own statement, he says his phone battery died after that point. And before the battery died, what area was the signal coming from? The cell tower zone attributed to Derek and Vanessa Holt's residential address. Ada Reyes's next question divided the room. Detective Okafor, in his statement, Mr. Teal says he waited in that area for no more than 15 minutes. What does the cell tower record say? Okafor projected a timeline onto the screen. According to the cell tower record, Marcus Teal's phone transmitted signal from that area for 1 hour and 46 minutes. 1 hour and 46 minutes. The room took that number and filled it with something. 15 minutes is enough to look through a window and leave. 1 hour and 46 minutes is a completely different story, and that story had not yet been told. Flaw count 3. Dana Park pursued a technical argument in cross-examination. Detective Okafor, cell tower data shows which tower a signal passed through, not a person's exact location, correct? Correct, Okafor said. And the coverage area of that particular cell tower is approximately 2.5 kilometers in radius. Yes, so my client could have been anywhere within that 2.5 kilometers, not necessarily at the address in question. Within the coverage area, yes. Park turned to the jury. She was no longer looking at Okafor. Ada Reyes exercised her right to redirect. She asked only one question. Detective Okafor, in Marcus Teal's own statement, how long does he acknowledge being in that area that night? 15 minutes, said Okafor. And what does the cell tower record say? 1 hour and 46 minutes. Reyes sat down. There was nothing left to add. The fourth flaw came from a message that had never been sent. On Derek's phone, in the drafts folder, there was a message. It had never been sent. It was addressed to Derek's closest friend, Kyle Morrow, and it read, "Bro, tonight I'm rolling solo. Told V I'm with you. Don't blow my cover." Ada Reyes projected the message onto the large screen and waited. She let the room read it. Then she asked, Detective Okafor, looking at Derek Holt's message history with Kyle Morrow, what form of address did he typically use? When the records are reviewed, he consistently uses man or the first name rather than bro. The word bro does not appear in a single instance across 2 years of message history. Reyes continued, and does this form of address appear in Vanessa Holt's own message history? Okafor, yes. The word bro is used frequently in her messages to friends and to her husband. The room absorbed the weight of that answer. A person, when behind someone else's phone, unconsciously uses their own language habits, and sometimes that habit gives away the entire plan. Flaw count 4. Carlton Webb rose. Your Honor, a word preference cannot constitute identity evidence. Reyes answered, no, not on its own, but evaluated alongside the other 6 chain links, it can. Judge Odom lowered her glasses to her nose. Objection overruled. Continue. The fifth flaw might have seemed the most ordinary, but the prosecution knew that the most ordinary thing is sometimes the most revealing. Vanessa Holt, that day, had left for a store a short distance from her apartment without taking her phone, and the explanation she gave for that was, it hadn't crossed her mind. ADA Reyes asked in cross-examination, Ms. Holt, in the same hearing you stated that you and your husband had an open relationship agreement, meaning you're claiming he knew about your relationship with Marcus Teal. Yes. Then why did you leave your phone at home and call him from a landline at a nearby store? There was a long silence. Vanessa answered, I left out of habit. The phone didn't cross my mind. When I was at the store, I wanted to call Marcus, and there was a landline there. Reyes, and in a relationship your husband already knew about, why did you use a landline at a store 3 blocks away instead of calling from home, from your own phone, or simply speaking to him face to face? Vanessa said nothing. Reyes said nothing either. The silence between those two women felt like it lasted much longer than it did. The prosecution hadn't offered an explanation. It had simply left a question in the air. But that question implied the answer was already there. If your husband knows, there's no need to hide. If you're hiding, it means he doesn't know. And if he doesn't know, that call made that day was a secret plan being set in motion. Flaw count, 5. Glenn Purvis was 63, an apartment building manager. He'd come to court in a flannel shirt. Nobody had told him to dress up for this. He stumbled slightly, climbing to the stand, but the testimony he gave was one of the sharpest pieces of the entire case. That night, Purvis said, I was coming in from outside. The elevator wasn't working. The corridor lights had been put out, but the apartment lights were on, so it wasn't a building-wide power failure. I went down and checked. The breaker feeding the corridor and elevator had been deliberately switched off. Had you ever encountered anything like that before? I've been here 24 years. No. The next statement came from Armando Cruz, who ran a small shop on the ground floor of the building. Derek always parked his car out front, Cruz said. There's a camera at the front. He did it to keep an eye on the car. But that night the car wasn't out front. It had been moved to the back. ADA Reyes. And is there a camera at the back? Cruz. No. The corridor lights had been deliberately switched off. The vehicle had deliberately been moved out of camera view. These two moves appeared independent of each other, but served a single purpose, ensuring that night, inside that building, would not be recorded. Flaw count, 6 and 7. Carlton Webb asked Glenn Purvis in cross-examination, can a breaker trip on its own? Purvis shrugged. Technically yes, but it's rare. And had Mr. Holt parked in the back before? Once or twice, yes, for store deliveries. Webb acted as if he was satisfied with that answer. But when Armando Cruz was called back the following day and asked again, he said, yes, he parked there twice, but on both those nights the camera was broken. This time the camera was working. 12-year-old Caitlin Holt was not physically present in court. A prior statement taken in the presence of a psychologist was submitted in written form. The defense had not objected to this method. Their reason for not objecting was that they believed Caitlin's statement contained an element in their favor, but the prosecution read the same statement differently. Carlton Webb used the following lines from Caitlin's statement. I didn't hear my father's voice that night. My mum came to me, came to the bedroom door, calmed me down, and took me back to my room. If an event violent enough to fill a house had taken place, Webb said, this child would have heard it. If she didn't hear it, that event did not happen inside that home. Reyes read the same statement from the stand. I heard arguing sounds, but I didn't hear my father's voice. My mother's voice was there, but I never heard my father's at all. Reyes closed the file. A daughter, at that hour, unable to hear her father's voice during an argument happening in her own home. Does that mean the father simply wasn't participating, or does it mean the father was already in no condition to speak? The room carried both readings at the same time. The defense version was logical. So was the prosecution's version. But the second version was heavier, because inside it lay the possibility that a daughter had, without knowing it, been a witness to her father's death. Nobody said that possibility out loud, but everyone heard it. Carlton Webb pressed a single argument throughout cross-examination: the absence of direct physical evidence. In this case, Webb said in closing, the prosecution has counted 7 separate coincidences. A coincidence is not a crime. Suspicion is not sufficient for conviction. To convict Vanessa Holt in this court, you must prove that ligature mark was made by her hands. No one has proven that. Dana Park placed Marcus's defense on more technical ground. Cell tower records show a phone in an area. A phone being present in an area does not establish its owner's participation in a killing. Mr. Teal has already acknowledged being in that area that night. The question isn't where he was, it's what he did. And on that question, the prosecution has not a single piece of direct evidence. Ada Reyes counted all 7 pieces of evidence in her closing. Out loud, but without hurrying. She left a few seconds on each one. At the end, she said, direct evidence doesn't exist in every case. Sometimes the truth emerges from 7 separate pieces fitting together, and each of those 7 pieces might be a coincidence on its own. But when all of them point in the same direction, that direction is the truth itself. Judge Odom lowered her glasses to her nose. The jury, she said, will evaluate guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Reasonable doubt is not every conceivable doubt. If the totality of the evidence would satisfy a reasonable person as to guilt, that threshold has been crossed. The gavel came down. The jury retired. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Outside the courthouse, the October Phoenix sun was as fierce as ever. Family waited, attorneys waited, and in a waiting room at the end of a corridor, Derek Holt's brother James held an old photograph of Derek, from a work event, smiling. 7 flaws had been counted. The answer now belonged to 12 people in that room. On the afternoon of the second day, the jury room door opened. The message was passed. The courtroom filled. Judge Odom took her seat. Waiting rooms emptied. And from every part of the corridor, people walked in the same direction, toward the same door, as if they were all pulled by the same gravity. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Outside the courthouse, the October Phoenix sun was as fierce as ever, but inside, nobody felt it. Family members came and went. Marcus's mother sat in the same hallway row every day. Vanessa's sister never once entered the courtroom. She waited in the corridor, behind the glass. The jury foreperson rose. On the charge of first-degree intentional murder, for both defendants, the jury finds guilty. Sounds of crying rose from one side of the room, from the victim's family. The defendants' families were silent. The particular kind of silence that shows how long someone has been waiting to hear something they still can't process. At the sentencing hearing, Judge Odom said, "This court finds it established that the 2 defendants deliberately planned and carried out a person's death, then took multiple steps to present that death as an accident. Vanessa Holt and Marcus Teal are each sentenced to 25 years mandatory imprisonment. Eligibility for early release may not be considered for 10 years. The flaw count had started at 7. But in truth, there was a single root flaw. The plan had tried to control everything. The lights, the camera, the phone, the whiskey bottle, the message. But that very excess of control became the strongest piece of evidence of all. Real accidents don't control this many things at once. They just happen." On the day the verdict was read, Kyle Morrow was in the back row of the gallery. When he heard the word guilty, he put his hands on his knees and bent forward. Then he slowly straightened, turned toward Derek's family, and lowered his head. No tears. Only the quiet acceptance that a bond, a 14-year friendship, had just closed somewhere in this room. This case wasn't a story about how an accident wasn't one. It was a story about why a plan that looks perfect can never actually be perfect. Because the more things a plan tries to control, the more traces it leaves behind, and every one of those traces carries a separate question. 1. No brake marks. 2. No fingerprints on the whiskey bottle. 3. The phone signal stayed in that area 1 hour and 31 minutes longer than claimed. 4. The unsent message said bro, but Derek never said bro. 5. She'd gone to the store without her phone. 6. The corridor lights had been switched off. 7. The car had been parked where no camera could see it. And you who have listened to this story, may now ask yourself, which flaw actually brought this plan down? The answer is perhaps all of them, perhaps none of them, on its own. But together, when 7 separate points all indicated the same direction, that direction was no longer coincidence. In Phoenix, the corridors of the Maricopa County Courthouse were prepared for other cases the following day. Derek Holt's file was moved to the archive, and nobody ever counted those 7 flaws again, because there was no longer any need to. A perfect plan is only perfect from the perspective of whoever designed it. For someone looking from the outside, a detective, a prosecutor, or a building manager, that perfection only shows how many things had to be arranged. Every arranged thing becomes a trace, and to leave no traces, you would have to do nothing at all. But then, of course, you wouldn't have a plan. Derek Holt was 38 years old, broad shoulders, an easy smile. He was always smiling in photographs, the kind of face that made people trust him immediately. That face now sat inside court files as evidence. And that, perhaps, was the heaviest truth of this entire case.